The pipe rattled like something alive. He'd tried the brush. Then poker, still clogged, smoke backed into the room, sour and sharp. He muttered, "Damn birds," and shoved his hand into the soot-black flue. The scream didn't come from him. It came from the metal itself. Then a body slipped out like a carcass down a chute, knees first, then arms, then a boy so thin he looked carved from the smoke. The man staggered back. The boy hit the stone floor hard, didn't cry, didn't move, just breathed, shallow and fast, eyes wide like he didn't know where he'd landed. "Jesus!" The boy flinched. What the hell?" Still nothing. The boy sat up slowly, arms shaking under his own weight. His clothes were rags. One shoe is gone, his face smeared black, lips cracked, eyes pale and wrong, like he hadn't seen daylight in weeks. "You okay?" the man asked. No answer. "You speak?" A blink. Nothing else. The man stared at the chimney, then back at the boy. He crouched, cautious. "How long have you been in there?" The boy looked past him, toward the door, toward the cold. "You run from somewhere?" Silence. "Sheriff looking for you." The boy's head shook once, sharp. "Are you hiding from someone?" No answer. He stood up, brushed ash off his hands. "Are you hungry?" The boy nodded. He lit the stove with what little kindling he had left. Pour water in the pot. Set out a slice of bread. When he looked back, the boy had crawled closer to the fire, not begging, not pleading, just there, still as stone. They ate without talking. Later, after the boy slept curled near the hearth like something half feral, the man moved quietly, stepped close, lifted the ragged shirt just enough to check his back. Then his shoulder. What he saw made him freeze. Not bruises, not burns. A tattoo. Fresh. But the skin it sat on was old. Scarred. Like it had been done twice. Once long ago. Once just days back. The name was clear. Inked black and sharp like it had been pressed in with a knife. Jameson. His father's name. His father had died 15 years ago. Buried under pine and lies. Sheriff's boots. A closed casket, and no sermon. The boy stirred. The man stepped back fast. The fire crackled. The name burned behind his eyes. He stayed up all night. When the boy woke, he looked around like he didn't expect the house to still be there, like it might have vanished in his sleep. "You're not just some chimney sweep," the man said. The boy said nothing. "You know who Jameson is?" No reply. "That name on your shoulder, where'd it come from?" The boy stared at the fire. "I asked you a question." Still nothing. "Was it your father?" The boy looked up finally. "No." "Then who?" "They made me wear it." "Who?" "The ones in the mine." "What mine?" His voice lowered. "The deep one." The man sat down hard in the rocking chair. It groaned like it hadn't been used in years. He stared at the floor. "Jameson's my father. That mine's been closed since I was 16. The boy didn't blink. "Are you telling me there's still people down there?" The boy nodded once. The man rubbed his face. "Why you?" "They said I was small enough to climb." "Climb what?" "The flues." The man looked at the fireplace. I looked back at the boy. "You come up through that?" The boy didn't answer. "You smell like burnt rock." "I smell like them." "Who's them?" The boy went quiet. The man stood, poured another cup of water. "You got more ink?" The boy shifted, tugging his collar. Another mark on the other side, just black lines, shaped like fire. "Why would they tattoo you?" "To keep me." "Keep you how?" "So I don't forget." "Forget what?" "What they did." The man turned away, pacing. He whispered, "You're not supposed to be real." The boy spoke again, low. "They told me he'd come." "Who?" "You." The man froze. The fire hissed. He sat down slowly, looked the boy in the eye. "What do they want?" The boy stared back. "For you to remember." "Remember what?" The boy's lips trembled just once, then stopped. "They said it's time." The house held its breath. The fire didn't flicker. The flue above them creaked once like something had moved. The man stood again. "You're staying," he said. The boy didn't argue. "I don't know what they sent you for, but you're not leaving till I get answers." The boy nodded. "First thing in the morning, we're going to the old mine." "No," the boy said. "No? It's not there in the morning. What does that mean?" The boy looked toward the chimney. "You'll see." The man didn't move for a long time. His eyes locked on the tattoo, the black ink harsh against the boy's pale, scarred skin. He couldn't tear his gaze away. The name was clear, too clear. Jameson. His father's name. The man stumbled back, hand pressed to his chest, his breath ragged. The house felt smaller. The walls, the floor, the windows, everything was closing in. He reached for the chair, his knuckles white as he gripped it. He gasped for air. That's my father's name. The boy sat on the ground, still as stone, arms hugging his knees. His eyes were empty. Too empty. The fire crackled behind them, louder now. Popping, snapping. The man felt a cold sweat run down his spine. You're not some damn ghost. You're real. The boy didn't flinch, didn't move a muscle. How long have you had that? The man's voice broke. His hands shook. How long, damn it? The boy lowered his head. They made me wear it. Who made you wear it? The man's voice was sharp now, harsh. His fists clenched. The boy's shoulders trembled. Slightly, he whispered, said it'd protect me. Protect you from what? The man's voice cracked, his patience thinning. The boy lifted his eyes. They were wide, too wide, like he hadn't blinked in hours. They said you'd come for me. The words hung in the air. The man felt them wrap around his neck, tightening, choking him. His breath caught, and he couldn't speak for a long moment. The room seemed darker now, the shadows deeper, the fire less warm. I don't. He swallowed hard, but his throat was dry. What the hell are you talking about? The boy's gaze never wavered. I don't know, but they said you'd come. The man stood up too quickly, knocking the chair over. His heart hammered in his chest. I'm not. He stopped himself, rubbing his face, the tension in his jaw tightening. I'm not your savior. The boy didn't answer. He looked back at the boy's shoulder, at the mark that seared into his mind like a brand. He was still trembling. He could barely hold himself steady. He glanced around the room like the walls might hold an answer. You look like him, the man muttered, his voice distant. You look just like him. The boy said nothing. The fire crackled louder now, too loud, like it had a life of its own. The man closed his eyes, trying to block out the noise, trying to think. Jameson, his father, that name. He could still hear his father's voice, deep and rough. You'll never be a man until you learn how to keep the house warm. And his mother, always quiet, always waiting in the background. He'd been a boy then, just a boy. But he remembered how his father used to burn the wood, how the smoke would fill the house until the smell of it settled in his lungs, how the fire would crackle like the world was burning, but nothing ever came out of it. Nothing ever changed. And his father had left him, and the man had to bury him in the dirt because it was easier to bury the dead than face the truth. He looked at the boy again. Why are you here? His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. What do you want? The boy's eyes softened just a little. I don't know. The man closed his eyes again, taking a deep breath. You came here to haunt me? The boy looked down, pulling his knees tighter against his chest. I didn't choose this. I never asked for this. The man muttered, pacing. He ran his hands through his hair, the tension in his body almost too much to bear. Why would they send you to me? The fire popped again, the noise cutting through the silence. You're the one who knows, the boy said, his voice low, strained. You're the one who keeps it all. The man stopped in his tracks, his breath hitching. Keep what? He demanded, but the boy only shook his head, his shoulders slumping. A long silence filled the room. The man stared at him, trying to piece it together. The name, the boy, his father's mark, his father's ghost, and the fire, always the fire. The boy was still there, his eyes closed now, his head resting on his knees. The man wasn't sure if he was still breathing. He wasn't sure if the boy had ever really been breathing at all. You think I'm some kind of ghost, don't you? The boy asked quietly. The man's heart stopped. I didn't ask for any of this, the man whispered, more to himself than to the boy. I didn't ask for you. I know, the boy answered. His voice was soft, almost kind. But you can't escape it. The man gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Escape what? The boy's eyes flicked to the fire again. You'll see. The man turned, not sure if he wanted to see it all. The fire crackled one last time. The boy wouldn't bathe, wouldn't wash the soot from his skin. He'd sit by the fire, staring into the flames for hours, his eyes empty, lost. The man tried to feed him, tried to give him a spoon, a fork, but the boy only pushed them away. He barely spoke, Only when the man told him to clean did he move. He scrubbed the hearth like it was holy ground. His hands, raw and trembling, scraped at the blackened stones, pushing the ash into piles that never seemed to disappear. The boy never stopped. It was like he was searching for something hidden in the dust, some clue, some answer that wouldn't come. One morning, the man walked in to find him bent over the hearth again, grinding his palms against the soot-covered stone. His face, half hidden by his matted hair, looked grim, like he was battling something invisible. The man watched for a moment, then stepped forward. "Enough," he said, his voice low. "Leave it." The boy didn't move. His hands kept working. "I said leave it." But the boy didn't stop. He just kept scrubbing, his knuckles pale, the skin cracked open. The man grabbed his arm. "Stop! I'm telling you to stop." The boy flinched, pulling his arm away, but he didn't protest. He just looked at the man, eyes wide, as if he had no words left. The man stood still for a moment, staring at the boy's face. His eyes weren't empty anymore, but full of something darker, something deeper. The man shuddered. He had no idea what he was dealing with. The boy's gaze flicked to the side, and that's when the man noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small mark on the boy's wrist, barely visible against the dirt. A number scratched deep into the flesh. It wasn't a tattoo, not like the others. It looked like it had been burned into the boy's skin, raw and angry. The man stepped back, his breath hitching in his chest. He pulled the boy's sleeve up, not sure what he was looking for, and there it was, a date. A date that made his stomach twist, and the air in the room felt too thick to breathe. October 13th, the date his mother had died. The boy didn't say anything. He didn't even look at him. His eyes were fixed on the hearth again, hands still scraping against the stone like it was the only thing that mattered. The man's heart pounded in his chest. "Where did you get that?" The boy didn't move, didn't speak. The man's hands shook. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. October 13th, his mother's death. It had been 15 years, but the grief still hung over him like a shadow, a weight he couldn't shake. He had buried her. He had buried the pain, too. Or at least he had tried. But now this boy, this damn boy with his father's name and his mother's date tattooed into his skin, was stirring up something that hadn't died. Something that shouldn't have been touched. Something that shouldn't be real. The man's jaw tightened. "You think this is some damn game?" The boy just stared, his face blank. He didn't answer. The man couldn't take it anymore. He turned away, his mind spinning. Why? Why was this boy here? What did he want? What had happened to him? The man grabbed his coat and stormed out of the house. He made his way to the town, to the mayor's office. It wasn't far. The town was small, run down, but the mayor's office was the only place where anything still felt like it had power. The man had never liked the mayor, but today, he didn't care. He slammed the door open and walked in without knocking. The mayor looked up, startled, from his desk. His eyes flicked to the man's face, then down to his hands. "What's got you riled up today?" "Where did you send him?" The man spat, his fists clenched. The mayor raised an eyebrow. "Send who?" "The boy, the one in my house." The mayor's face hardened. "The rat from the hollow," he sneered. "I told you, he's not your problem. He's just a ghost from the past, a leftover." "Don't call him that." The man's voice dropped low, a growl in his throat. The mayor leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Why? You think he's something special? He's just another orphan they left behind. Another one of those damn kids they send to rot in the mines. But that boy's got blood on his hands, and it's yours." The man's heart skipped. "What the hell are you talking about?" The mayor leaned forward, his tone sharp. "You really think I don't know? That boy's got your father's mark. He's just like your old man. A rat, same as the rest. They used him, turned him into a tool, and now he's here to settle the score." The man stared at him, trying to process the words. His head spun. "I didn't ask for any of this. You think I wanted him here?" The mayor leaned back again, eyes narrowing. "It's not up to you, son. You can't run from it. It'll all come back to you, just like it always does. This town doesn't forget." The man stood frozen. The mayor's words were a cold slap against his face. "Where did you send him?" The man's voice cracked. The mayor's smirk never wavered. "I didn't send him anywhere. But the boy, he's got nowhere else to go. He's not just a child, you know. He's part of something bigger, something you'll never outrun." The man stood there, unable to breathe. His hands shook. His father's name. his mother's death, the boy. And the mayor, with his knowing eyes, seemed to hold all the answers. The man didn't speak another word. He turned and left, feeling the weight of the mayor's gaze digging into his back. It felt like something old, something he had buried deep inside him, was stirring again, something that couldn't be forgotten. He didn't know where to go, he didn't know what to do. But the boy was still waiting for him, with those cold, wide eyes, and he was done running. The knock came just after dusk, loud and sharp, breaking the quiet of the house. The man wasn't surprised. He'd known it was only a matter of time before the sheriff came sniffing around. He'd seen the way the boy flinched when the door creaked open, seen the way his eyes darted, like he was ready to bolt. When the man opened the door, the sheriff stood there, grinning like a man who'd just won something he hadn't earned. His hat tipped low, casting a shadow over his sharp eyes, his smile wide enough to cut through the evening air. "Are you keeping strays now?" the sheriff asked, his voice smooth, almost friendly, but there was a weight to it, a threat buried in the words. The boy froze at the sound of the voice, his body tensed, stiff as a board, his eyes wide with something that wasn't fear, but something older. The man stepped aside, letting the sheriff in, but his gaze never left the boy. The sheriff's eyes lingered on the boy for a moment, his smile never wavering. Then his hand reached out, brushing the boy's hair, a little too long, a little too familiar. The boy flinched. A quick, sharp motion like a startled animal. The man felt something in him twist, a cold, heavy feeling in his chest. "Easy, boy," the sheriff said, voice too soft, too smooth. His fingers didn't leave the boy's head, just stayed there a little too long. The boy didn't pull away. He just stared ahead, staring into nothing. The man couldn't read his face. It was like the boy had disappeared inside himself. The sheriff's hand finally fell, his smile slipping just a little, but not enough to make him look anything less than smug. "You've got that mark, don't you?" he muttered, nodding at the boy's shoulder. "That ink ain't for children." The words hit the man harder than he expected. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the sheriff's casual tone. Maybe it was the way the sheriff said it like he knew something he shouldn't. The boy's eyes flicked to the man's face, but there was no anger, no fear, just something distant, something that made the man's skin crawl. "I asked you a question," the sheriff continued, stepping closer. "Where'd he come from?" The man stood tall, blocking the sheriff's view of the boy. "Doesn't matter." The sheriff's smile widened, but there was something darker behind it now. "Are you sure about that? The boy's got history, and you're a little too interested in him for someone who just stumbled into his life." The man didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too busy staring at the sheriff, feeling the weight of his words, the heaviness of his presence in the room. The man had always known the sheriff was bad news, but now it felt like something darker was pulling at the edges of the room. The sheriff took a step back, running a hand over his jaw, his eyes scanning the room. His gaze slid over the fire, over the pile of coal, then back to the boy. "I'm just saying," the sheriff said, lowering his voice. "You don't get to keep him. Not with that mark. Not with the history that boy's got. You don't know what you're dealing with." The man clenched his fists, but said nothing. The sheriff wasn't wrong. He knew it. But there was something inside him that wouldn't let go of the boy. Not yet. The sheriff's smile slipped for just a second before he straightened, nodding like he'd made his point. "I'll leave you to it then," he said. "But don't think I don't know what's going on here. You can't keep this one hidden forever." And just like that, the sheriff was gone. The door shut with a snap, the silence in the house settling in like dust. The boy didn't move, didn't even blink. The man stood there, feeling the weight of the sheriff's presence lingering like smoke in the air. He couldn't shake it. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was already too far gone to stop. The boy was staring into the flames again, his face empty, his body still. That night, when the man went to bed, he heard the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, dragging on the wooden floor. He bolted upright, but by the time he reached the door, the boy was already gone. He found him in the hallway, standing still, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Boy," the man called, his voice thick with concern. "What are you doing?" The boy didn't respond. He didn't even seem to hear him. The man took a step forward, reaching out for him, but then the boy spoke, his voice low and hollow. "He wasn't buried," the boy whispered, like he was talking to someone else, like he was speaking through someone else's mouth. Not all the way. The man froze, a cold chill running down his spine. What do you mean? He asked, his voice hoarse. The boy's eyes never blinked. His face didn't move. He wasn't buried. The boy repeated, his voice so soft it was barely a breath. He's still out there. The man grabbed his shoulders, shaking him gently. Who? Who's still out there? The boy didn't answer. The house was silent, except for the crackling fire. The air was thick with something the man couldn't name, something he couldn't shake. It wasn't the first time he'd felt it, not by a long shot. But this time, it felt different. This time, it felt like the past had finally caught up with them. The boy didn't say anything as he led the man down the narrow steps. The air in the cellar was thick, heavy with the scent of old wood and dust, but there was something else mixed in, a sharp, acrid smell like metal. Something burned. The man followed, his boots thudding quietly on the floor, the creak of the door behind them seeming too loud. They reached the bottom, the walls dim in the flickering light of the lantern. The man paused, squinting. The stone foundation was cracked in places, the floor uneven, and the air felt colder than it should have been. The boy stood still, his back straight, his eyes searching the darkness, like he expected something to appear. He didn't speak, just pointed to the wall in front of them. Carvings. Not words. Symbols. They were etched deep into the stone, worn and faded by time, but unmistakable. Fire. Chains. A badge. Strange markings that didn't make sense, but the man felt something in his gut tighten when he saw them. He'd seen those same shapes before. His father's branding iron, the fire, the badge. He stepped forward slowly, his breath shallow, unsure of what he was about to find. The carvings weren't random, they were deliberate. They told a story, but it wasn't a story anyone wanted to hear. The boy stood behind him, his voice a whisper. They marked others too. The man didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He already knew. The markings on the wall, they weren't just symbols. They were a warning, a record, a memory of the past. Where's the rest of it? The man asked, his voice low. Where's the rest of the mark? The boy stepped forward, walking to a pile of dirt near the corner. He knelt down, his fingers brushing over the ground until he stopped. His hand hovered over something. Then slowly, carefully, he reached down. The man watched as the boy pulled out something metal buried beneath the dirt. The branding iron, his father's old iron, still warm. The man felt his breath catch in his throat. His heart slammed against his ribs. He had never expected to see it again. Not like this. Not in a place like this. The boy handed it to him, his eyes vacant. They marked the others with it. The man's fingers curled around the handle. It was cold now, but the heat still seemed to seep into his palm, like the iron had never truly cooled. The weight of it felt too familiar, like something he had never wanted to hold again. He turned the iron over in his hand, examining the shape. The metal was worn, the edges chipped from years of use. The man could feel his father's presence in the metal, the force of his hands holding it, the way it had once burned into neat flesh, and the way it had burned into him. I don't understand, the man muttered, looking up at the boy. Why are we here? The boy didn't answer. He just stared at him, unblinking, like he had seen it all before. The man's thoughts raced, but they couldn't keep up. What did my father do here? His voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the thick air like a knife. What did they do to you? The boy didn't flinch. They took what they wanted, he said. Then they marked us. They left their sign. The man clenched his jaw, his grip tightening on the branding iron. What sign? The boy turned away, his face hardening. The one you can't forget. The man looked at the iron in his hands again, then back at the boy, who had already started walking to the other side of the cellar. His steps were quiet, almost careful, like he was navigating something fragile. The man stood there for a moment longer, staring at the symbols carved into the stone. It was all coming together now. The markings, the iron, the boy, his father's legacy. The air seemed to grow colder, heavier, as the man walked toward the boy, the branding iron still clenched tightly in his hand. He didn't know why he was holding it, didn't know why he hadn't thrown it away the moment he picked it up, but something inside him wouldn't let go. Maybe it was because, deep down, he understood. The boy was here because of it. They were both here because of it. The boy stopped near a wooden shelf, his eyes scanning the shelves, his hands brushing over forgotten things, Empty jars, old tools, broken crates. The silence between them felt thicker now, heavier. "Tell me what happened," the man said, his voice low, almost pleading. The boy finally turned to face him. "They made us work," he whispered. "They made us build." "Build what?" The boy's eyes darted to the ceiling as if searching for something above them. "Something that would last." The man stared at him, trying to piece it all together, but the words didn't fit. "You're not making sense. What did they build?" The boy's voice dropped even lower. "A cage." The man felt the floor shift beneath his feet. His breath caught, and his heart hammered in his chest. "A cage?" The boy nodded. "For us." The man's eyes flicked to the wall again. The symbols, the branding iron, the chains, a cage, a place to keep them, a place to trap them. His father had been part of this. He had known about it. He had built it. And now, the man realized, it was all coming back. All the things his father had done, all the things he had hidden. The boy was the reminder, the key. A key to a cage that would never open. The man gripped the boy's arm hard, his fingers digging into the boy's skin as he dragged him through the dry grass toward the chapel. The sun was low, the sky tinged with amber, but the air had turned thick, oppressive, like it was holding its breath. The chapel had been locked up for years, decades maybe. The doors had been barred shut, and the windows were boarded over. No one came here anymore. It was a ruin now, a memory. But the man had heard the rumors, heard the whispers about what used to happen inside those walls, the things that didn't belong in this town. He kicked the door open with a crack that echoed through the evening air. The boy didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there, his eyes wide, watching the door swing open. The inside was as cold as it had been left, as though the place had been forgotten by time itself. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and dust hung thick in the air. But there was something else. Something that didn't belong. A scent, a sharp metallic tang mixed with something burning. The altar was in the center, covered in black ash, but something else caught his eye. A rusted sheriff's badge, dull and chipped, lay in the center of the altar, half buried in the soot. The boy stepped forward without a word, his hand reaching out toward the badge, fingers trembling, as if he were drawn to it. "They watched from here," the boy whispered, his voice hollow, like it had been dragged from somewhere deep inside him. The man felt his stomach twist. He wanted to pull the boy back, wanted to shake him, but instead, his feet moved of their own accord, and he found himself kneeling beside the altar, his hands touching the black ash. His jaw trembled as he reached for the badge, the cold metal brushing against his fingertips. "What is this?" he whispered, but the words felt weak in his mouth, like they were not his own. The boy didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the badge, staring at it like it held all the answers. "Who are they?" The man's voice broke, the question falling from his lips like a weight. "Who are they, and why do they keep coming back?" The boy didn't look at him. His eyes were wide, searching the walls, the ceiling, as if expecting someone or something to step out of the shadows. "They were here," the boy whispered again. "Watching." The man's heart slammed in his chest. He pulled the badge away from the ash, his hands shaking. He knew what this was. He knew who this belonged to. His father's badge, worn by the sheriff in this town before the man was born. The same sheriff who'd disappeared without a trace. The same man who'd left this town in silence. "Tell me," the man demanded, his voice strained. "Tell me who they are." The boy didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the walls, his face pale, his body trembling. There was a pulse of something in the air, something dark and old, like the chapel itself was breathing. The floorboards creaked beneath them as if the building was waking up, stretching its old bones, coming to life again. The man clenched his fists around the badge, his knuckles white. His mind raced, but he couldn't put the pieces together. He could feel the weight of history pressing in on him, suffocating him. The boy's gaze moved, and the man followed his eyes to the far corner of the room, where the shadows seemed to move, even though there was no light. A cold chill ran down his spine. "They're here," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible, a thread of terror in the words. "They never left." The man stood up suddenly, his heart pounding, the badge still in his hand. "Who? Who are you talking about?" His voice cracked, desperation rising in his chest. The boy took a step back, his eyes widening. "The ones who never left, the ones who buried the truth." The man felt a deep ache in his chest. "The ones who buried it?" He shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his mind. "I don't understand." The boy's voice dropped lower, his eyes wide and distant. "Your father's friends, the ones who kept him here." The man froze. His heart stuttered in his chest, the blood draining from his face. "My father." The boy nodded slowly, as if this was something he had known for years. "He was one of them. He helped." The man felt the walls close in around him. The world spun, and for a moment, he couldn't breathe. He was holding the sheriff's badge in his hands, but it didn't feel real. It felt like he was holding the weight of everything he had ever buried. His father's sins, the town's secrets, his own memories. The boy stepped forward again, his voice barely a whisper. They did it together. They built it. The cage. The man took a step back, the badge heavy in his hand. His father, his own flesh and blood. The man he had never understood. The man he had buried. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" The man's voice cracked, his eyes searching the boy's face for something he didn't understand. The boy's eyes softened, his hands shaking. I couldn't say it before." The air in the chapel thickened, the shadows growing darker, closer. The man felt like something was watching him from every corner. He wanted to run, but he couldn't. He was trapped here, surrounded by things he didn't understand. "They'll come for you," the boy whispered, his voice trembling. "They'll come for both of us." The man turned his gaze to the shadows again, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel them, watching, waiting. The past wasn't done with him. It had never left, and now it was closing in. The man had been in the courthouse before, 100 times at least, but it never looked like this. Forgotten, dust-choked, and silent. The hinges of the back door squeaked when he forced it open. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old paper and mildew. He stepped inside, careful not to make a sound, his boots barely whispering on the wooden floor. The courthouse had been abandoned for years, its halls empty, the echoes of its past long, faded. No one cared to lock it up anymore, and now the man was here to search through the ghosts. He knew exactly where to go. The records room, the place where everything was kept, every scrap of paper that had mattered once upon a time, births, deaths, taxes, and labor. And there, somewhere in the dusty stacks, he hoped to find something. A clue, a name, an answer. The door creaked as he pulled it open, and the smell hit him like a slap. Old wood, old leather, old lives stored away like nothing but memories. He pushed aside the stacks of paperwork, his hands moving over them quickly. His breath hitched as his fingers brushed over a ledger. The spine was cracked, the leather worn, but it looked important. The man pulled it off the shelf with a quiet grunt, the weight of it heavy in his hands. He opened it, flipping through the pages. At first it was nothing but lists, names of apprentices, orphans, workers from the mines. Every page was filled with them, like a graveyard of forgotten lives, scrawled in the same hasty handwriting. But then he stopped. His eyes caught a set of pages that didn't look right. Torn, ripped. The pages had been gutted, pieces of the ledger missing, like someone had purposely gone through it, pulling out the evidence, leaving only fragments behind. The last entry, the one that stayed. His hand trembled as he ran his finger across the words. Jameson Estate Furnace Crew. The ink was faded, barely legible, but it was enough. The words burned into his mind like a brand. Jameson, his father's name. He stared at it, trying to keep his breath steady. His throat felt tight. The Jameson estate, the furnace, the crew. His father had run this. This was where his father had been. He had been more than just a miner, more than just a worker. He had been in charge of something bigger, something darker. The man closed his eyes, holding the ledger tight against his chest. He could hear his own heartbeat thudding loudly in his ears. His mind was racing, trying to piece it all together, but it was like trying to put together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The boy stood in the doorway. The man hadn't heard him approach, but there he was, silent as ever. His hands were tucked in the pockets of his ragged coat, his face blank, as if he had no idea what the man was holding, what he had found. "Where did you come from?" the man asked, his voice hoarse. The boy didn't answer. Instead, he stepped into the room and moved closer to the ledger, his eyes locked on the words. The boy tilted his head to the side, like he was studying it. But there was no surprise in his gaze, no shock, just calm, a kind of knowing that unsettled the man. "They've been here too," the boy said softly, almost to himself. "Watch this." The man didn't respond. He couldn't. The words stuck in his throat like tar. The boy looked back at him, his eyes full of something the man couldn't read. "The furnace crew," the boy said. "They didn't come back, not all of them." The man swallowed, the lump in his throat growing. "What are you talking about?" The boy's gaze flicked back to the ledger. "They came from the mines, the ones who built it, the ones who worked it. They didn't leave, not all of them." The man stared at him, confusion clouding his mind. "What do you mean? Where did they go?" The boy's voice was a whisper now, low and steady. "They stayed down there, in the dark. They were marked." The man's pulse quickened. "What does that mean? What are you saying?" The boy stepped back, his eyes distant. He hummed a soft tune, something low and haunting, like it had been passed down through generations. The man froze, his body tense. He knew the song. He remembered it from the funeral. It had been sung by his mother, her voice cracked with sorrow. She had stood by the open grave, the wind blowing through the trees, and the song had filled the air with something dark, something cold. The boy continued to hum, his voice soft and eerie, like it had come from a place that was no longer here. His words were slow, almost reverent. "They never left," the boy murmured, his voice trailing off as he finished the tune. "They kept working, and they kept marking." The man felt a shiver crawl down his spine. "Marking? What do you mean?" The boy's gaze flicked to the floor like he was seeing something the man couldn't. "Branding them, like cattle." The words hit the man like a blow to the chest. He remembered his father, the branding iron, the way his father's men had burned their mark into anyone who worked for him. But this wasn't just about the work. It wasn't just about the furnace. This was about something far darker, something that had been buried for a long time, something that had never been buried deep enough. The man slammed the ledger shut, the sound echoing in the quiet room. "We have to stop this." The boy didn't answer. He just stood there, eyes still fixed on the floor, humming the song again, like it was all he had left. The man took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His fingers tightened around the ledger as he turned away. The truth was coming, and he didn't know if he was ready for it. The woman sat in the small kitchen, the dim light from the oil lamp casting long shadows against the walls. Her hands trembled as she stirred the pot, the spoon moving in slow circles, the motion mechanical. Her face was older than the last time the man had seen her, lines etched deep into her skin, eyes darkened by time and sorrow. But the grief had always been there, lingering behind her eyes, a quiet force she had never been able to shake. The man stood in the doorway, watching her. He hadn't come here to be a guest. He hadn't come to chat. He had come because he needed to know, needed to hear the truth. She didn't look up, but she knew he was there. The silence stretched between them like a rope that had been pulled too tight. She was waiting for him to speak, waiting for him to ask the question. "You knew," he said quietly, his voice strained. "You knew about the boy." The woman set the spoon down slowly and wiped her hands on her apron. She finally looked up, her eyes meeting him, filled with something that might have been pity, or something darker. "I knew," she whispered. "I knew what he was." The man stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "What is he?" She looked at him for a long time, as though weighing her words carefully, measuring the weight of the truth. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping as though the burden of the years had finally caught up to her. "That boy ain't the first," she said, her voice quiet, broken, but clear. "He ain't the first one to come from the hollow. There were others, more than you know." The man's heart skipped. "Who are they?" The woman didn't answer. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing her arm. The skin was scarred, raw in places, and the tattoo that marked her stood out like a wound that had never healed. It was the same symbol he had seen in the cellar: fire, chains, a badge. She touched the tattoo with her fingertips, tracing the lines slowly, almost lovingly, like it was something she had long accepted. "Your father owned the flesh," she said softly. "He marked us, every one of us. You didn't think it was just the miners, did you? It wasn't just the furnace crew. It was all of us. He had us marked." The man's breath caught in his throat. He took a step back, his mind reeling. His father, the branding iron, the boy. Why? His voice was hoarse now, his mind struggling to comprehend the full weight of her words. "Why tattoo my name?" The woman's gaze softened, the pain in her eyes now mingled with something like pity. "Because you're what comes next," she replied. The man's head swam with the words. He had always known his father had blood on his hands, but this was something else. His father hadn't just controlled people, he had owned them, marked them, owned flesh. "What comes next?" The man's voice was almost a whisper. He felt the world tilt around him, the edges of his mind trembling. "What do you mean?" The woman let out a breath, her eyes closing for a moment. When she opened them again, they were tired, old. "The boy," she murmured. "He's part of it. The legacy. It doesn't stop. It never stops." The man's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What does that mean? The boy's not just some orphan." The woman continued, her voice low, almost regretful. "He's part of what your father left behind, part of the system. The ones who still run it, they're looking for him. They've always been looking." The man's chest tightened, and for a moment he couldn't breathe. "Who?" "The ones who marked you," she said, her voice like a thread being pulled. "The ones who own what's left. They're always looking for the next one, always looking for someone to replace what they lost. And you, son, you're next in line." The man stepped back, his heart hammering in his chest. Number, you're wrong." "I'm not wrong." The woman's voice was steady now, no longer broken, but clear. "You've been marked all along. Your father left his mark on you. It's in your blood. You can't outrun it. None of us can." The man's hands were shaking now, his fists balled at his sides. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say something?" She stood up slowly, her body creaking like an old tree in a storm. "Because I didn't want to bury you too. I didn't want to make it worse." The man didn't know what to say. His mind was racing, his thoughts spinning like a wheel that wouldn't stop. Everything he had ever known felt like it was unraveling, piece by piece. His father, the boy, the legacy. The woman's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, the man saw the weight of the years in them, the regret and the pain. "You were never meant to be a part of it," she said quietly. "But it's too late. It's already inside you, and it's inside him." The man shook his head, unable to process it. The boy, his father, his past. He turned and walked toward the door, his body moving before his mind could catch up. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to leave. He had to get away from the woman's words, from the weight of the truth that was pressing down on him. But as he reached for the door, he stopped. The boy's song echoed in his mind. He wasn't running from it anymore. The past had caught up to him, and now it was all coming for them. The man packed his things in silence, moving through the house like he was preparing for a funeral, not a departure. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay here anymore. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in, the air too thick with memories he didn't want to face. He needed to get away from the boy, away from this town, away from the past. He threw the last of his belongings into a worn satchel and turned to the boy, who was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames with that same empty look on his face. He hadn't said a word in hours, maybe days, but that silence was more unsettling than any scream. "We're leaving," the man said, his voice rough. The boy didn't move. "We have to go." The man repeated, more urgently this time. "This place. It's too much." The boy blinked slowly, but didn't respond. He didn't even look at the man. The man felt the weight of his decision settle heavily in his chest. "We're going to the river. We'll leave together." He had hoped the boy would follow him, but the boy just stayed where he was, his eyes fixed on the fire, as if he hadn't heard a word. The man exhaled, frustration creeping into his voice. "You have to come with me." The boy didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge him. The man grabbed his coat and stormed out the door, the cold air biting at his skin as he made his way to the river. He didn't look back. He didn't want to. The boy was still behind him, waiting, motionless. He had to leave. He had to leave everything behind. The river was wide and muddy, the water moving sluggishly as if it didn't care what happened to the world around it. The man set down his things and turned to the boy, who had finally followed him but stood at the water's edge, staring at the river with the same vacant look. The man sighed and began to unbutton his coat. The boy wasn't going to come willingly. He wasn't going to leave. Not unless the man made him. He stepped into the water first, the cold rushing up his legs, biting into his bones. He turned back to the boy. "Come on," he called. "We need to wash you clean." The boy hesitated for a moment, then slowly began to walk toward the water, his bare feet leaving prints in the mud. He looked almost like he didn't belong to this world, like he was floating above it, detached from everything around him. The man reached out, taking the boy's arm gently and guiding him into the river. The boy didn't resist, but he didn't react either. His skin was still black with soot, as if it had been burned into him, as though nothing would ever wash it away. The man began to scrub him, his fingers working the grime off the boy's skin, but no matter how hard he rubbed, no matter how much water he poured over the boy's body, the soot remained, dark and stubborn. "I can't," the man muttered under his breath. "It won't come off." The boy didn't answer. He didn't even blink. The man's fingers moved over the boy's shoulders, trying to get the dirt from under his nails, but it was like the boy was made of the very earth itself. It was as though the soot wasn't just on him, it was in him. The man's hands were shaking now, his breath ragged. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his voice desperate. "Why won't it wash off?" He tried again, rubbing harder, but the soot remained. No matter what he did, it wouldn't come off. Suddenly, a voice interrupted the silence, a low, soft voice that came from behind him. "You can't wash it away," the midwife said, standing a few feet back from the river, watching them with tired eyes. The man looked up at her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer, her gaze on the boy. "It's not dirt," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's what was done." The man felt a chill run through him. "What are you talking about?" The midwife's face was grim, her lips pressed tightly together. "They didn't just dirty him, they marked him. They branded him with it." The man stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. "Brand him? Who? Who did this?" She shook her head, eyes narrowing. "You already know." The man's blood ran cold. "My father?" The midwife didn't answer, but the look in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. The boy stood silently in the water, his eyes glassy, staring out at the river as though he didn't hear anything that was being said. He hadn't moved since the man had started washing him. He didn't flinch when the man's hands touched him, didn't respond when the man spoke to him. And then, just as the man was about to speak again, the boy coughed, a sharp, violent cough that echoed in the silence of the river. The man turned to him, startled, but the boy wasn't finished. He coughed again. Harder this time, his body convulsing, and the sound that came from his mouth was horrible, like something trying to escape from inside him. The man stepped back, his heart racing. He watched in horror as the boy bent forward, his hands pressed to his chest, his eyes wide and terrified. And then the boy coughed once more, and this time, what came out wasn't air. It was ash, thick, gray ash, that fell from his lips and scattered into the river like dust. The man stumbled back, his stomach churning, unable to look away. He stood there, frozen, unable to move, as the boy continued to cough, and the ash fell from his mouth, turning the water black. The boy looked up at him, eyes wide with something the man couldn't name. "It's inside me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The man's knees went weak, his body shaking with terror. "What is?" The boy just stared at him, his breath ragged. The man couldn't look away. The ash kept falling, and the water kept turning black. The man didn't speak as he stepped back into the chapel. Dust still floated in the air like ash that never settled. He walked past the altar without looking at it, past the scorched floorboards, past the boy's quiet shadow leaning against the frame. He knelt beside the fire pit someone had once built where the pews used to be. Maybe for warmth, maybe for something darker. He reached into his coat pocket, hand trembling as he pulled out the rusted sheriff's badge. It was heavier now than when he found it, not in weight, but in memory. He stared at it for a long time before setting it down on the coals. It didn't catch right away, just sat there, dull and cold. Then the fire licked it. The metal hissed. The boy sat near the edge of the hearth, silent. The man didn't look at him. He wore it like it meant something, the man said. Like law came from his hand. The boy didn't blink. It did. Back then. The fire crackled louder, the badge blackened. The man stood slowly, brushing soot from his knees, and turned toward the doorway, just in time to see the sheriff step through it, boots loud on the chapel floor. "Thought I might find you here," the sheriff said. He had the pistol out already, held loose like it wasn't a threat, but it was. "You gonna finish your father's work?" he asked, voice low and even. "The whole town's watching, even if they don't say it. You're the only one left with that name now." The man didn't answer, just stared at the gun, then at the fire. The sheriff stepped closer. "You think burning that badge changes anything?" The man's jaw tightened. "It's a start." The sheriff laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This ain't a story you get to rewrite. That boy is just another piece of what your father built." The man didn't flinch. He finished enough. The fire cracked louder, sparks snapping into the air. The sheriff raised the pistol slightly. "That badge belonged to a man who cleaned this town up. You really think I'm going to let you burn what's left of it?" The man took one step closer. "You came too late." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You think you're not part of this? You think because you threw a badge in the fire you're clean?" The boy stood, slowly, quietly. He moved between them. His small body broke the line of fire and gun. The sheriff's pistol didn't lower. The boy looked at the man first. "He can end it," he said. Then he turned to the sheriff. "If he doesn't run." The man's breath caught. The words cut deeper than he expected. "Step aside," the sheriff growled. The boy didn't move. The chapel held its breath. The man took another step forward, his hands open, calm. "What's your part in this?" he asked, voice low. The sheriff blinked. "I kept order." "You kept silent." The sheriff's lips curled. "I kept people from tearing themselves apart. By hiding what they built underground." The sheriff's eyes flicked to the fire, where the badge had started to glow faint red. "You think you're better than him? Than your father?" "No," the man said. "But I'm not him." The boy looked up at him. "Not yet." The words held weight. The sheriff raised the pistol. "That badge in the fire doesn't matter. You still got his name, still got his blood, still standing in his chapel." The man stepped between the sheriff and the boy now. He stood tall, unarmed, still. "You gonna shoot me?" he asked. The sheriff didn't answer. The fire danced behind them, lighting the walls with a pulsing orange. The boy watched, eyes wide, unblinking. "You think I'm scared of what he left behind," the man said. The sheriff's jaw twitched. "You should be," he said. The boy whispered, "He was." The sheriff's hand trembled just slightly. "I was 12, the man said, "when I saw what he did in the barn. You remember that?" The sheriff's face twitched just once, then stillness again. "You said it was justice," the man continued, "that some things had to be kept quiet for the good of the town." The sheriff shifted. "You don't understand what it cost to hold this place together." The man's voice hardened. "And you don't get to call it order when it's built on silence." The boy stepped forward again. "You're scared because it didn't stay buried." The sheriff lowered the gun an inch. "It should have." The man took one more step. The sheriff didn't move. "The fire's still burning," the man said, "and you're the one still holding a gun." The silence stretched. Then the sheriff's hand dropped. The pistol hit the floor with a hollow clatter. He turned, walked to the door, paused. "You burn that badge, burn it good," he said without turning around. "But don't think it ends with that." And then he was gone. The boy sat again, quiet, watching the fire. The badge had begun to melt. The man stared down at it. His hands felt cold. The boy looked up. "It's not just his name. It's what you do with it." The man said nothing. The metal curled in on itself, soft and glowing. Outside, the wind picked up. The chapel didn't creak. The fire held. The man heard it before he saw it. The soft scratch of the flue damper, metal nudging metal. The boy stood on a chair near the hearth, soot on his hands again, reaching into the chimney like it called to him. His arms were too thin, but he stretched higher anyway, fingers brushing something inside the pipe. The man set his mug down. "What are you doing?" The boy didn't answer. He reached deeper. "Get down from there," the man said, stepping forward. The boy pulled his arm back slowly. Something clutched in his hand. Not ash, not a bone, a piece of folded paper, charred around the edges, crumpled, stuffed deep into the flue like someone had tried to send it up in smoke and changed their mind too late. He climbed down and handed it over without a word. The man took it gently. His name was on the front, not his first name, just one word, son. His hand shook as he unfolded it. The handwriting stopped his breath. He hadn't seen it in over 15 years, but he knew it. Slanted, neat, his mother's. The boy stood still, watching him. The man read, "If you found this, it means the truth burned slower than I feared. It means he didn't tell you what we did, what I helped him hide. I'm sorry for that. You were a child. You didn't need to carry it then. But the town made its own rules, and we followed them. We branded workers like animals. Let the furnace take what it wanted. Some were children. Most had no names. I made a list before I ran. I buried copies. I don't know if they'll ever be found. But I left you this. If you read it, know that your name was never meant to be part of theirs. You were supposed to break it, not become it. A second page was folded inside, drawn in pencil, lines shaky. A rough map, not of the town, not on the surface, below it. Tunnels, rooms, crossed out passages. One circled spot, Jameson Furnace Intake. A second note beneath, carved names on stone. Look there first. The third page held names. Dozens. Some in red ink. Most just initials. The man read them all. Some he recognized. Most he didn't. A few still lived in town. His throat burned. The boy whispered, "We're still here." The man looked up. "What?" The boy pointed at the list. Them. United States. Still here. The man felt something shift inside him. The weight of the badge. The mark on the boy's shoulder. His father's voice in the back of his mind. He folded the letter slowly, then looked at the chimney. Blackened. Open. With one sharp motion, he slammed the flue shut. The sound echoed through the house like a shot. "Not for long," he said. The boy stared at him, unsure. The man turned, grabbed his coat, his boots, and the iron poker from the fireplace. "Where are we going?" the boy asked. "To finish it." They crossed the field in silence. The wind picked up bitter and strange, carrying the scent of old wood and ash. The barn loomed ahead, its roof sagging, door hanging crooked. It hadn't been opened in years. The man pulled the latch hard, the hinges groaning as they gave way. Dust poured out, thick and cold. Inside, it was all still there. The tools, the furnace in the back, iron-bellied, soot-covered. Its pipe reached into the ground like a root that never stopped growing. The man walked to it, opened the hatch. The boy didn't follow. "You used this?" the boy asked. The man didn't turn. "He did. My father, before I was big enough to reach the bellows." He picked up a shovel, broke open the coal bin. The dust swirled around him. The boy stepped closer. "You're going to light it?" The man didn't answer. He stacked the coal like his father taught him, layered the kindling, struck the match. The fire roared to life fast, too fast. The boy flinched. The man didn't move. "This is where it started," the man said. "The badges, the names, the branding, all of it." He fed the fire, watched the flames grow. "What are you burning?" the boy asked. "Everything." The man pulled the letter from his coat, held it over the flames. The boy grabbed his arm. "Wait." The man looked down at him. "Not the names," the boy said. "Keep the names." The man paused, then folded the letter back up, slipped it into his coat again. "All right." They stood in silence as the furnace burned hotter, louder, until the walls of the barn groaned. The man picked up the iron poker, pushed the coal deeper. "They carved names in the stone," he muttered. "Below the intake. You think they're still down there?" The boy didn't blink. "I know they are." The man nodded once. "Then we bring light." He opened the furnace hatch again, fed it more coal. The flames licked the walls. Outside, wind screamed through. The trees. Inside, fire held steady. Not angry, not wild, just ready. By dawn, the smoke had climbed so high it touched the steeple. The barn groaned with the weight of fire inside, old beams crackling under the heat. Soot curled out through the roof slats like the place was exhaling. The sky was gray, then red, then gold. The whole town could see it. They came in silence. Old men from porches, women with kerchiefs tight over their heads, children held back behind skirts. No one said a word. They just stood, watching, the field between them and the barn split by black smoke and memory. Inside, the man knelt beside the furnace. The heat singed his lashes. His coat was gone. His shirt hung open, soaked in sweat and ash. The air was thick. Breathing hurts, but he didn't move from the spot. The names had been there all along, not just in the letter, etched into the furnace walls. Dozens of them, not first names, not last, just initials, branded deep into the iron shell with shaking hands and the kind of silence that takes years to form. Each name he fed to the fire, not by paper, by iron. He took the branding tool his father once held and struck it against the stones again and again till the iron bent. Then he laid it across the coals and let it glow red. One by one he ran it over the names. One by one they hissed, 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 and faded. He didn't erase them. He released them. Outside, the townsfolk flinched each time the sound broke through the barn walls. The boy stood just beyond the open door, arms crossed, his face set still. He didn't step inside. He didn't look away. The man dragged the branding iron behind him as he stepped out of the smoke. The handle blackened, the end still glowing faint. He looked like someone reborn through something violent, face streaked in ash, hands shaking, chest heaving. But his eyes were clear, not soft, but steady. The crowd parted for him. He didn't speak, just dropped the branding iron onto the grass. It hissed against the dew. Then he knelt in front of the boy. "You keep your name now," he said. The boy looked at him, no tears, just something older than sadness. He nodded once. Behind them, the barn let out a long, shuddering breath. One of the beams inside gave way, the roof sloping further inward, flames slipping out like tongues tasting the air. The people didn't move. The man didn't stand. The fire didn't spread. It stayed inside, like it knew where it belonged, like it was only meant to take what was owed. The mayor was the first to speak. "What's inside there?" The man stood slowly. "Truth," he said. A murmur passed through the crowd. Not loud, not fearful, just tired. The sheriff stood at the edge, arms folded, gun at his hip. "You think that ends it?" he called out. The man turned. "No." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Then what now?" The boy stepped forward. "Now it's ours." The sheriff's gaze flicked to the fire, to the boy, then back to the man. "You really think a furnace can burn that deep?" The man didn't blink. It already did. The wind picked up. Smoke curled around their ankles. The barn shifted again, but the fire was lower now. The hiss was gone. The names were gone. The man walked over to the branding iron, picked it up by the cool end. He held it out toward the sheriff. "You want it back?" The sheriff stared at it for a long time. Then he turned his back and walked away. One by one, the townsfolk followed. No one asked more questions. No one offered help. But no one tried to stop them either. By midday, the fire had burned itself out. The barn was half collapsed, but the field around it stayed green. The man stood at the edge, watching the last of the smoke rise like a ribbon to the sky. The boy stepped up beside him. "They'll forget." The man nodded. "Let 'em." "You won't." "No," he said. "I won't." The boy glanced at the ashes. "What was your mother's name?" The man's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. He looked down at the boy. The mark on his shoulder was still there, still faint under the soot. But now, it didn't look like a curse. It looked like something broken, like a chain snapped halfway through. "You ever gonna tell me yours?" the man asked. The boy didn't reply. He just walked ahead, toward the hill, toward the chapel, toward the trees. The man watched him go. Then he turned back toward the furnace. The metal had cooled. Inside, the last name he'd burned was his own. He didn't have to look to remember it. He let it stay there, buried in smoke and steel. The name was gone, but the boy remained.